The iPhone 12 Pro Max. Yes, I've finally bought one. And while no, this doesn't mean I'm totally off Team 12 Mini, I've got to be grown up enough to admit when I was wrong to say that big phones are always bad. Because honestly, dang, I really like the 12 Pro Max. So why is that? Let's find out. And while we're finding out, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. I don't exactly remember why I got it into my head that I wanted to get a hold of a 12 Pro Max, but much like everything else when it comes to this channel, when something gets stuck in my head, I couldn't get it out. So last week I went out and bought this 128GB version at my local Apple store. And while I think I was wrong about the 12 Pro Max, and yes, we'll get to those reasons in a second, I would like to clarify and say that I still do not like the 12 Pro. I think it's because it's dimensionally smaller, leading it to being a much more uncomfortable phone experience. So I was wrong about the 12 Pro Max, definitely not wrong about the Pro. The 12 Pro is probably one of my least favorite phones of recent memory. But as this is going to be a quasi kind of follow-up video to a video that I never made, that made a lot of sense, Gary. Let's dive into the things that I've liked and disliked after the past week of ownership. And no, before you ask, nobody gave me this phone. I bought this for myself, and as this phone is now about roughly 3 months out of the hot topic trending title game on YouTube, even though all of those things, I wanted to make my position on it a little more clear. And if this is your first time hearing about this clearly ancient and out-of-date device, yes, that's a joke, please don't hurt me in the comments section, let's cover the ordering options and specs if you wanted to buy one for yourself. The iPhone 12 Pro Max is located in the same section as the 12 Pro. Even though it's the flagship top-of-the-line phone, it doesn't get its own fancy section on the Apple website. At its lowest model, okay, are we all sitting down? At its lowest model, it's gonna hurt me to say it. It costs how much? This thing costs $1,099, which for comparison's sake is as much as the MacBook Air, or almost an entirely functioning Apple ecosystem if you get something a little bit further down the totem pole. For that staggering amount of money, you get a cell phone with Apple's latest A14 processor, 128GB of storage, a 6.7-inch admittedly beautiful Super Retina XDR display, and the real headlining additional spec, the brand new, larger sensored wide-angle f1.6 camera. Yes, more on this in a little bit. You can also go up in storage to a phone with 512GB for it is kind of less shocking $1,399. I know that's going to sound bad, but I say less shocking because that first sticker price did so much of the face punching. That's what caused my face to hurt. After that first one, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. All right, Gary, enough of the specs. Why, oh why, did you get this? And why, oh why, lots of whys, were you wrong? Well, I've talked an awful lot about how much I like the size of the 12 Mini. And frankly, it's still my favorite sized phone that I can think of in recent memory. So what I'm going to say doesn't take anything away from my beloved 12 Mini. And I'm prefacing this because that's how the internet works. You have to preface things because you can't just assume that everybody's following along with what you're thinking in your own brain. I actually really like the bigger size of the 12 Pro Max more than I like the size of the 12 Pro. You've heard me complain a lot about the density of the 12 Pro. It made it my least favorite of all the variants of the iPhone 12 from last year. The 12 didn't bother me. Obviously, the Mini doesn't bother me. And the 12 Pro Max doesn't bother me because it's so big that you have to hold it differently to use it effectively. You can't as easily single-hand type all around it, so you end up, or at least I end up, supporting it with both hands when in use. And because of that, the weight doesn't bother my wrist or my forearm nearly as much as being able to single-handedly hold the 12 Pro does. And yes, I think because they made it bigger, some of the one-handed typing convenience of the smaller phones is lost, but it almost kind of works out the same because you almost absolutely have to use both hands to type anything, be that text messages, sick Twitter burns, or I don't know, whatever else people use their phones for. TikToking? Mine's for sick Twitter memes myself. It seems counterintuitive, but in the past week, I haven't had any joint pain, and that's not something that I could have said from the 12 Pro. The other side of the argument, though, the size isn't all good, though. I was absolutely right in running with this thing totally sucks, and I won't be doing that at all. It's way too big to comfortably hold, and the one short jaunt that I did do to prove this point to myself, it sucked. Like, this is uncomfortable to try to hold as you're running, and I will not be replicating that in the future. Thankfully, I have a cellular Apple Watch that will be doing all of my music listening for me, so I don't need to carry this anymore. So, win-win. Plus, it is kind of meh when fitting into pockets, but thankfully, one of the other technology advancements that I've transitioned to over the past couple of months, I've moved over to stretchy jeans, which if you haven't tried stretchy jeans yet, It will change your life. So the size doesn't cause as many problems with limiting your range of motion as it did for me when I had this 7 Plus a few years ago. Something that I absolutely love about the 12 Pro Max is the new camera. The main camera here is the latest technology that Apple has to offer when it comes to both their sensor technology but also their usability tech. On the physical hardware size, this is the largest sensored camera that Apple offers. And if you're not a huge camera nerd like some of us here on the YouTube space, that just means that because the sensor is bigger, the pixels on that sensor can also be bigger unless they increase the megapixels. They didn't here. That means you will get bigger sensors leading to better performance in low light or being able to give a surprisingly amount of a naturally occurring shallow depth of field for a cell phone. And if you don't know what shallow depth of field is, that's the difference between what is in focus and what is out of focus in an image. And shallower depth of field is, for better or worse, associated with higher quality cameras and lenses. That's why all the software trickery goes into every cell phone having a portrait mode. Combine that bigger sensor with the wider open 1.6 aperture, and this camera is easily the best that I've ever used on a cell phone. Pictures look crisp, they are very sharp, and a lot of that has to do with the heavy lifting that's done in the hardware. But part of the reasons that cell phones are as good as they are is because they also have behemoth processors inside of them, and the software side of the camera technology here is also bonkers. With the 12 Pro line, Apple introduced a format called ProRAW, which takes the best of traditional camera technology and the best of cell phone computational photography and combines it into probably my favorite photography format ever. Raw photos in a normal camera just means that it's all of the information taken straight off of the sensor, sometimes with a little post-processing and sometimes without. This gives you an awful lot of flexibility after the fact to mess around with the information contained in that file, to change the white balance, move around the highlights and the shadows, and do all of that other cool stuff that I've seen in all the Twitter videos and all the tutorials that you'll see on YouTube. Well, ProRAW adds that information to a file that's already had the AI rendering done to it that cell phones are known for. So you get a file at the end of it that is both awesome right out of the box, but also has a huge amount of flexibility in your editing program. And even the Photos app now has some pretty serious editing chops to it. And what's cool about this is normally you only get one of those. You can't have both. You can't have your cake and eat it too. That's against the very fabric of reality, but not here. This breaks the fabric of reality, in photography means. You'd think that because this is a cell phone with that comparatively smaller camera array, that this format just wouldn't work, but it works phenomenally. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details of a raw camera workflow today, but in layman's terms, these images are very sharp, they have very little noise or comparable noise to a full-frame mirrorless camera. They look incredible. Like I said, this is easily the best phone camera that I've ever seen and ranks quite highly up there with some of my much more expensive cameras. And that's good to hear, because part of the reason for me purchasing this phone was I wanted a better carry around everywhere camera and figured it was actually smaller to just get and use this instead of my 12 mini and another point and shoot camera. And after having a few outings with the family, I have zero issues with that decision. The camera here lives up to all of the hype. Something else I've absolutely loved about this phone is the battery life. One problem that I've had with the 12 mini, and yes, every phone in my life is now set up in comparison to that. So just be prepared that everything will be compared against the 12 mini in the future. Except the battery life was pretty meh. It never failed to meet my 8-hour workday requirement, but it always felt like it just barely met that requirement, so I always kept a backup battery with me just in case. However, the battery life on the 12 Pro Max is great. I've had not a single problem with it lasting well over that 8-hour workday, and the thing basically never needs to be charged throughout the day, no matter what I do to it or what I do with it. I'm all about not needing to worry about power levels in my tech life. I hate needing to bring extra batteries for any of my gear, my laptop, phone, tablets, whatever. Anytime I need to bring a battery, that means I now need at least an extra cable to plug the two in. I'll need some kind of a bag to carry the cable and the battery. It just starts to cascade into a logistical headache when all I want is the phone to just work and be powered on. The 12 Pro Max and my M1 MacBook Air, boom. That is like the perfect work combination, and for what they cost. Okay, for what the two combined cost, I'm glad that that statement is true. I also really like the display. Having this much screen real estate does make the 12 Pro Max much better as a content consumption device than that 12 mini that I'm used to. YouTube videos and movies are now much easier to see. I don't have to squint so much when I'm looking at the phone. Like, the bigger size means my old man eyes can see better. I can expand out text boxes a little more when trying to read really small fonts. Look, I'm nearing that dreaded 4.0. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, so yeah. the bigger display is nicer to have than I'd probably like to admit. Yes, it's not 120 Hz or some kind of Apple ProMotion high refresh rate, but I'm not exactly chomping at the bit for that advancement. I'm sure it'll eventually happen, maybe on the 13s when they release this year, and I'm sure it'll look great when it happens, but that costs battery life and R&D dollars that I'd honestly prefer that just went towards putting USB-C into the body of the phone. If this had USB-C, we don't need 120 Hz refresh rate. I don't care about fast refresh displays, and until I see it and am wowed by it, I'm probably going to keep that stance. But I'm a YouTuber, and I like technology, so that stance is always held until I'm wowed by whatever they make. I also like that despite the extra size and weight, my MagSafe charger and little mount thing that I use easily holds the weight of the 12 Pro Max. Now, I'm not swinging it around like I did with the 12 mini, but it holds it well enough that I haven't had an issue with it falling off the charger while I'm sleeping, which is, yes, another great feature. Though, speaking of charging, that does lead me into the things that I don't like. There is no such thing as a perfect phone. This certainly does not break that mold. One, the first thing, despite costing as much as my MacBook Air, it doesn't have those same connections, and it still sticks with the Lightning port, which just sucks. Lightning was cool when it first came out and was the king in the land of micro USB, but it's a legacy port at this point, and it's the weakest link in the Apple chain. It's slower, proprietary, and not nearly as reliable as USB-C. And while I know Apple will probably just take the port away before they give us USB-C, it would just make them more competitive with a standardized port. I mean, look at their tablets. The iPad Pro and iPad Air both have USB-C, so the iPhone team should stop being so stubborn and embrace it too. Just embrace it. USB-C, that's what we all want. It's what we all want. Just bring it in. Bring it into Team USB-C. The only other negative that I really have with the phone is the price. It's just crazy expensive. Yes, it is a premium phone, and yes, it has all of the premium features, and yes, Apple does have much cheaper options that do 90% of what this phone can do. And yes, for the fourth yes, that is a huge feather in Apple's cap, and one of the things that I think makes them the awesome phone maker that they are, but the 12 Pro Max is still very, very expensive. But at the end of the day, so what, right? Yes, I was wrong to prejudge the size of the 12 Pro Max without using it. I actually really like this phone, and it's not nearly as constraining as I thought it would be, and it's just so much better than the 12 Pro. However, despite all that, despite Gary liking it, would I recommend this to you? If you are like me and looking for a hybrid point-and-shoot camera to go along with your phone, yes, I would easily recommend this. To get the same level of quality out of the camera, you're going to need to spend about what this phone costs anyway, and this does give you so much more in addition to being a camera. Plus, if you buy a camera, then you would need to also buy a phone. This is everything all in one. If you are looking for the best battery life on an iPhone because you don't want to carry around extra batteries and junk, I would also recommend the 12 Pro Max. And if you just like big phones, if you're just a big phone person and you want the biggest screen you can get, well, here you go. There's a third recommendation for you. But if you just want an iPhone to be an iPhone and you are scared that you are missing out because you don't have the most expensive option, then I would not recommend it. If you just want a phone that does what a modern phone does, in addition to AirDrop, iMessage, etc., you can easily get the 12 mini for almost half the price, or even get the SE from 2020 for even less, and a physical Touch ID button if you're not a big fan of Face ID. The 12 Pro Max is great and has definitely caused me to reflect on my hesitance for bigger phones in the future. Thanks to today's sponsor, Squarespace, you can create your own very beautiful website. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a professional website, online store, or portfolio. It's so easy to claim a domain/URL, create a custom site that matches your style, and brings your ideas to life. Head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head on over to squarespace.com/everydaydad to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And thank you for watching.